We're on a road to nowhere. Come on inside. Taking that ride to nowhere. We'll take that ride. I'm feeling okay this morning. And you know, we're on the road to paradise. Here we go, here we go. There's a city in my mind. Come along and take that ride, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. And it's very far away, but it's growing day by day, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. Would you like to come along, and you can help me sing this song, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. There's a city in my mind. Come along and take that ride, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. And it's very far away, but it's growing day by day. It's alright, baby, it's alright. They could tell you what to do, but they'll make a fool of you, and it's alright, baby, it's alright.
Hello, everyone. I can see some people in here. I recognize a few of the Abbies, Miss Jenna Whoopty, Lucky, and I'm sorry I can't see the other ones, but I know that I love you and I appreciate you for being here regardless. So the gentleman I have tonight that's joining me is Jamie K. McCallum. He has written 3 books on unions, labors, and something that essentially all of us are talking about. And weirdly enough, I said essentially, and his new book is called Essential. And so I definitely wanted to have him here to talk about this. I've interviewed a lot of union strikers and such on this channel. So it's exciting to get to speak with someone from another perspective. And you also teach sociology in Vermont.
That's right, Middlebury College.
That's so awesome. We love Vermont. Yeah, I see people in the comments. So please tell people about I wrote your book names down. All 3 of them seem absolutely incredible. No audio books though. Damn it, Jamie.
There's one.
Oh, there is?
The
Which
second one is
I
an audio. The last book I wrote is an audio book. And
Yay.
I think they're doing one for this book too, although I don't know anything about it, to be honest.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah, they all look amazing, and I've read your other writing in New Yorker and Jacobin as well. So thank you so much for joining me. I was like, I don't think this guy's going to even respond, but yay.
Thanks for having me.
First, please tell us about your new book, Essential.
Yeah. So I started writing the book about essential workers as soon as the pandemic hit. I had swine flu and was quarantined. I was the first person to get it in South Africa, actually. So was quarantined at the time, and that was 2009. And I was very, so I sort of lived through a small experience of a pandemic. And so when it started happening in China, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's going to happen. And so I began interviewing people in China, and then I began interviewing people in Lombardy, where it spread next. And I eventually came here. So I did the States. And that's what the book is about. It's mostly about COVID in America. But it started really from just tracing the trajectory of the virus and trying to figure out how frontline workers were dealing with it.
Absolutely. That's amazing. So what were you doing in South Africa?
Oh, that was a long time ago. That was research for my first book. So I was researching.
Oh, I
I
see.
wrote my first book was about um, union transnational labor organizing in South Africa, India, North America, and Europe. So I did a lot of traveling.
Oh,
And
that's
South
amazing.
Africa has like the most interesting labor movement in the world. So I was there for a while working on that. It doesn't. I mean, nothing of that work at all is present in this book, which is mostly, again, all about, it's about 6 or 7 industries in America, mostly during the last 3 years. But before, my work was mostly abroad.
So, while doing your newest book, what is something that was there anything from your interviews that surprised you?
I mean, well, at the time, you have, if you, it's, yes, I mean, a lot. I mean, at the time, everything was surprising because it was March 2020 and no one had any idea what was going on. And so, um, when you talk to people, um, they would say things like, "Oh, well, my coworker didn't come in this last week, and then they didn't come back a month later when I followed up, and it's because they died, at McDonald's." And so, we're sort of um, like accustomed to. We've sort of become not not like immune or something, but like the stories of mass death, we understand them now as on a certain basis. At the time, it was happening in real time, and so that was sort of surprising. Um, Toward the end of the year, well, I don't know, maybe at some point the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out their data, and it showed how many strikes there were in 2020. For example, there were 8, right, according to the BLS. And but every person I talked to was like, "Oh yeah, there was a walkout yesterday, or there was a work slowdown, or a protest, or a strike, or we walked out." And I was like, "What?" And they just were small little things. And throughout the year, these things began creeping up. So when I saw the stats at the end of the year, I'm like, "There's no way there were 8 strikes. There was 50 strikes." And there was like 10 times that number. And so um, the official record of the pandemic's first year did not really capture what was happening. And the only way you would know is if you just talk to a million people. And if you talk to enough, eventually you're going to talk to people who had this sort of fight backy experience. And that sort of became a grounding point for the book.
Absolutely. When you were speaking with people, did they seem to feel like if they had health concerns or if they were experiencing like cough, sore throat, anything like that, that their bosses were accepting of them saying, you know what, I think I'm going to call off tomorrow. I don't really feel well.
Yeah. I mean, no, depends on the industry you're talking about. I mean, I was interviewing most people in healthcare, education, food processing, nursing homes, meat packing. Those places, just retail, even those places are autocratic, feudal with a D, like feudal establishments. There's not like a democratic vibe. It took a long time for people to get time off, like regular paid sick leave. Like you couldn't get a bathroom break on a meat packing line. Like I talked to workers who routinely just, like wet in their pants because they couldn't get a break. Far less a screen guard or a face mask. So I think we sort of forget a little bit, like really how completely insane it was. Like we just sent people off to die every day. And when they died, we didn't even keep track of what job they were working. Like the CDC does not know how many people caught COVID at work and died. They don't know how many people died from which industry. They don't even have a guess. And so it was a time when there was just so much intense fervor and, um, you know, just insanity, really, that it's hard to remember. And then the other thing that went along with that was an incredible outpouring of public support. Like, like the public all of a sudden was like, oh, nursing home workers and food delivery drivers and retail clerks are like human beings. And not only are they human beings, they're vital to my very survival every day. And that was like a pretty different vibe than we usually get. And so when you contrast the incredible outpouring of like love and adulation for essential workers mixed with the real material conditions of their work, you get like a contrast. And I think it was that contrast that really fueled a lot of the discontent, during the pandemic and then since.
Do you think that, like, by your observations, do you think that people have kept that mentality that people who work in those jobs are still essential? Or do you think they're kind of desensitized to all that and just kind of, back in embracing their cognitive dissonance?
Well, pretty quickly, you mean the general public?
Yeah.
I mean, pretty quickly, the general public moves from let's salute our essential heroes to nobody wants to work anymore. And that's a pretty significant about face. Like that's a 180. And so, I think to me that shows how superficial the public support really was in a certain sense. Like the minute that there was Biden's extended unemployment benefits began to filter out to people, and people could afford to stay home for a little bit, which they did. People began to call them lazy. As soon as vaccines became important, people were like, get back in those nursing homes and schools and crowded meatpacking facilities. There was like nothing, a year after the, in 2021, there was no one talked about flattening the curve. Everyone was like, we want our stuff now. And so I think that was a dynamic that really happened. And there was even some of that among essential workers. I mean, on the left, we like to think that like essential workers lived through this hellscape and then all took the same lessons from it. And that's just not true. I mean, half of essential workers in America voted for Trump. And significant, depending on where you lived in the country and at what point, like you were more likely to die because of how you behaved at work. And those just, a reality that happened that, there's not really like a monolithic group out there that sometimes we think there is.
Right. That makes perfect sense. As far as, you shared yesterday, I believe it was, that you were in the New York Times back in 2006 getting arrested with fellow associate professors. Can you explain what that was about and if that was like your first time doing, direct action?
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, at that time, it was fellow graduate students. I wasn't even supposed to be at that strike. I mean, I didn't even go to that school. I just knew people there. So I went down to the picket line. They're like, we're getting arrested. I was like, let's do it. Let's do it. And I mean,
yes.
I come from a political tradition where, I'm sort of a Quaker, and civil disobedience is like the starting point, not the ending point. So there's been a lot of that in my life. But that was a picket line for NYU graduate student faculty I did not go to NYU. I went to CUNY up the street, the public university in New York City. But I joined their pickets because they have the right. They needed support. I didn't expect to go to jail for it, but that's the way it goes. And that's so I actually wrote a story about adjunct, the recent strike in California of 48,000 graduate student workers that's coming out in the nation tomorrow. So I've had like a bunch of grad student issues on my mind, which is why I shared that.
Wow. Yeah, we are seeing a lot of that. We see it at a lot of we're seeing conditions at college campuses, things like that, in their dorm rooms, HBCUs especially. We're seeing so much of that. So what other people that you interviewed are trying to unionize or have been striking besides retail and healthcare and restaurant workers?
Yeah. So if you look at the big data, like data on large strikes, which is over 1,000 people or more, which is what the BLS collects, those strikes were led by, of the 8 in 2020, half were led by nurses. I think of the 15 in 2021, a fair number were led by like campus workers. And so if you think about, what makes, like, how does a strike happen? Like, how do people go from going to their job every day, which they need to survive, and then end up risking everything by walking on a picket? And there's a few things, like I was a labor organizer for a while when I was younger, and a few things, like you don't just wake up one day where it's like, today's the day, boys, we're going out, like that doesn't work. And so one thing that happened, I think, over the last couple of decades that was sort of we're quiet about, is that the working class, the U.S. working class, absorbed more poor people on the bottom of the ranks and more highly educated, like master's degree and PhD dropouts on the other end of it. And so there's a segment of the sort of striking and militant working class population, which all have master's degrees. And, they make 60, 80 grand a year. And they work at online media firms, the NGOs and college campuses and newspapers and magazines. And they're pissed off. And so I think we're seeing like a new, people think of the working class as like a bunch of white guys in shiny jackets in Pittsburgh. And like, they're there for sure. But like the most militant segment of the United Auto Workers are faculty now. And that is a shift that I think is really important because, our economy has shifted from a manufacturing sector to a service economy. And to some extent, the militancy sort of has come with it. And so I think that's an important thing. I mean, the Starbucks thing is interesting. No one really saw it coming. I mean, to be honest, I thought my book would be like a history book. I thought it would be like, oh, here's the story of the pandemic, just so everybody knows what happened.
Right.
And actually, like literally the day it came out, like everything I said I thought would happen was happening. It was, just sort of luck, because what happened during the pandemic was that it set a fuel to a fire that I kind of thought maybe had burned out, but it was just getting going. And I think we're seeing that, we're seeing the effects of that now.
I'm interested to see if you've spoken with people who have tried to unionize and it hasn't worked. A lot of the people I'm interviewing from Starbucks and Amazon and what have you, they have unionized, but then they're getting pushback, or the person that they elected to be the head of the union is now maybe not their comrade. So we're seeing a lot of things like that. so did you deal with anyone in your interviews who has experienced something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, I often think like the slogan for everything I do is like unions are necessary and essential and vital, and yet they also suck a lot of times, like they're just not enough. And yes, union leadership like sometimes sells out membership. And yes, like sometimes they're corrupt and sometimes they're weak and ineffectual. Um, but, and the Starbucks workers, the Amazon workers, nobody has a contract. Nobody has a collective bargaining agreement. No one's seen a raise, you know?
They've
So
seen a lot of pink slips, though,
they've seen peace. They see,
unfortunately.
yeah. I mean, look, I think, this is not maybe you because you've done all this work, research and whatever, but like, I think it's hard for people to appreciate how difficult it is to do what they're doing is like, and how crazy it is. Like, to form a union in America is basically an uphill battle against your employer, the government, your community, and other people too. Sometimes your church, sometimes whatever else. And very often, like you win and win and win and win, and then you never really win. Like you lose. I think that's an important reality to take stock of and to appreciate. And I don't want to be Pollyannish, but also like, the what happened to JFK 8 in Staten Island with the Amazon workers. Like as a labor historian person, there's like there's almost no precedent. Like I remember after that happened, and we were all like, I talked to Chris Smalls like 3 years ago when he was like a guy, and I was
Me
like,
too.
yeah, and he's like, we're not going to stop till we get unions at Amazon, and I was like,
Yeah.
well, you're not going to do that, and he's like, we are, and I was like, all right, good luck, and I hung up the phone, and then 2 years later they did it, and so he definitely won that one, and it
Yeah, I
was
had a
like,
bar with him in New York City, a beer with him at a bar in New York City, like the year before, and he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna keep fighting." I was like, "Hell yeah!" And then next thing
yeah,
you know, I'm like,
yeah,
"That's
it's crazy.
badass."
It's crazy. So I think that, those things were so unexpected, and what's happening now is expected. Like they've lost a few elections, they've slowed down a little bit. It's like they have no institutional capacity, and those things are important to note. Nonetheless, I do think that like the wave that we're seeing now is important. Um, I think one of the most important reasons it matters so much is because it's not confined to an industry. Like the teacher strike in 2018 was just copycat strikes, basically.
Right.
It's like, oh, they're doing it, we'll do it, And what the pandemic did, I think, the way it transformed the landscape of American labor was that all of a sudden, like the pandemic working class was not like was a hodgepodge of people in a bunch of different industries. And they all faced the same, similar conditions. So I think for that reason, you're seeing a wave, not like, oh, a million Amazon facilities just won, but like Amazon workers, retail workers, education workers, childcare providers, nurses. Like it's sort of happening in like across different industries. And that to me suggests that the movement is wide. And that's like historically, as a labor geek, like those times are good for labor upsurges.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious as a healthcare organizer and activist. I'm curious. Not, I know you spoke with people who work in healthcare, but did any of the people you interviewed for Essential talk about how they were worried to strike because they would lose their health care, or they want to unionize because their health care sucks, or anything like that?
So yes and no. I mean, I think that first of all, like almost everyone's healthcare sucks. Like,
Mhm.
like I have the best healthcare in the state of Vermont, and it's not very good, and so if you like in the early part of the pandemic when how many people lost their jobs, I can't remember, a lot, right? Millions. And
Yeah.
when you saw the statistics, it said, well, only 2 million people lost healthcare when they lost their job, and
Only.
that's it's all
Yeah.
it's 2 million, but still percentage wise, drop in the bucket, right? But what that means is that 10 million other people did not have healthcare to lose. Like they didn't have it to begin with.
Exactly.
That's why that number was so small. And so you had a working class, who were facing down a deadly virus that no one knew how to cure, um, without any healthcare at all and without any PPE for the first 2 months. So yeah, people struck. I mean, the strikes and the disruptions and the organizing that happened the first year were worker safety protests. That's why they were
Right.
out there. I mean, were they striking like for Medicare for all? Not really. Um, like I think
We
there was
were.
a way in which like the pandemic was like it was like an urgent, dire situation, and like you know, it was easy for me to sit back and say, well, Medicare for all would be good for this. And what a lot of people, you know, agree or not, they were like, a mask would be good for this, right? And that's what they thought day to day. And so I want to appreciate that level of urgency and those different, positions we come from. It impacts how we view those things.
Now, with being in the state of Vermont, with the guy who wrote the damn bill,
Right.
do you speak with people like even your students who do not have health care at their jobs or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty like, how should I, like, Vermont is small, right? There's just over 500,000 people here. I lived in Brooklyn. There was like more than that, like on my block, and
Yeah.
so it's small. So it's kind of like you're always involved, and I'm rather civically engaged. So like I'm on the fire department, for example, and the fire department is basically a civic organization. We don't fight that many fires, and there's, as you might imagine, there's pretty different views among people in the fire department and people in the academy about like what kinds of free healthcare people deserve. So that is an argument that happens. And at the same time, because Vermont is so weird, it's so anomalous politically, like there's a lot of like redneck Bernie crats out there who are just like, as long as I can keep my gun, sure, you want to, sure, Medicare for all, whatever, and like that is like a position that people take. I'm also on the local school board, and so I deal a little bit with like healthcare issues related to the teachers union. Um, their healthcare is very good. It's also very expensive. Um, and people don't like paying for it, like taxpayers don't like paying for it. So I hear about this stuff all the time, and because it's Bernie land and Vermont, like the healthcare reform, we have a law that says everyone has access to free healthcare. It's not funded, but it's on the books, sort of like Act 48 was sort
Right.
of like,
Right.
and that was one, like 2 years, like I was very, very tangential to that victory because it happened. My organization at the time was the one who won it. It's called the Vermont Worker Center. And so we take great pride in that, but still it's, nowhere to be found in reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if your students, do you have anyone who maybe like audits your class because they want to, learn how to unionize, how to organize, or do you hear from students who, you know, are now inspired to do something historical?
Yeah, I mean, I have like, it's probably no surprise. Like, I work at an elite, like WASPy liberal arts college in the Northeast. Like the kids come from boarding schools and blah blah blah. There's not that many from Bethlehem, PA. I'll tell you that. And so um, within that, though, it's also rather progressive, like comparatively. I mean, sort of liberal anyway. And so I attract the left flank of those people. And invariably, a lot of them go on to do interesting things. And, I have a former student who basically was one of the leaders of that. She works for the union who led the UC strike last December, which was, the biggest education strike in American history. And
Yeah.
so she was a sociology major. So you do get people who are interested and become invested in the labor question. The other thing that's interesting is that 10 years ago, I couldn't like pay people to take my classes. Now, like unions are cool. Like, like all the woke young kids, they like unions. Like they think the working class is where it's at. And they were like inspired by Bernie, they were inspired by DSA, they were inspired by Sunrise and the Squad people, blah blah blah. And for one reason or another, for those reasons, they think unions are pretty cool. And so in that sense, now I find myself dealing with slightly different kinds of people who are a little bit more interested in racial justice than unions, or interested in green politics than unionization. And that's, interesting for me.
What about I know a lot of times when I have people on to discuss unions, what about workers co-op? What are your thoughts on that?
You mean for or against?
Yes.
I mean, every privately owned business in America should be a workers' owned co-op, and probably all those businesses should be owned socially. But at the same time, like with the way it's currently organized, like are worker-owned co-ops a solution to what ails us? No, I don't think so. Like the problem is like that. I think people, it's like the ownership of the capital stock in America from a political economy standpoint is the most crucial determining factor of like how we experience our lives, probably. But to change that, you have to own a lot of it. And right now, sure, there's a lot of worker-owned co-ops in America. There's, Tennessee Valley Authority, that's a big one. There's like a couple public utility companies that are cooperatively owned. There's King Arthur Flour in Vermont, where everyone should get their flour from, if possible. And but it's like those hardly do much to chip away at the legitimacy of the capitalist economy. If you're talking about like a Leninist dual power strategy, like collectivize the economy slowly but surely and eventually erode the power of the capitalist core, that's a good strategy. You just have to wait a long time for it to happen. And there's a lot of worker-owned co-ops who like workers don't become enlightened like progressives when they own their business necessarily. Like that's not something that necessarily happens. There's all kinds of people that are in worker-owned co-ops that run the businesses all kinds of ways. My last book was about labor time, and worker-owned businesses tend to work on average longer hours than do non-ones. It's not really a great statistical model given the way you measure it, but still, it's like they're I think they're important, essential, vital, and insufficient.
That's really valid. I didn't think about that. There are definitely some people who believe that unions are okay, but it is an extension of capitalism. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think, what is that? What do you mean when you say that? An extension of capitalism?
Essentially, you have to pay dues, and you have to be like essentially part of a club, to get benefits that should be given to everyone.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's nothing capitalist about clubs, first of all, and of course you pay dues. Like, that's the way organizations are run, by our money. It's better, in fact, if we pay dues, because, well, then it's our organization. We pay for it, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's a few things I think. I mean, I understand the criticism, the point you're making. I just don't see it that way. Like, I don't think that unions are magic. They're not like the easy answer. And a lot of them aren't that useful to a lot of people. But, like, if you think about, like, what do we need to make social change on a large scale, right? Like, that's the question everyone wants to know. We know the answer, right? The answer is, like, a multiracial and multi-gendered working class movement that can create a large enough crisis for capital to exact big enough concessions that can act as non-reformist reforms to push forward an agenda that can eventually open up a large enough window, like, for a socialist movement to make real headway. And so when you work backwards from that, like, okay, a multiracial working class movement, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, you have to organize people. It's like, well, okay, well, how do you do that? You have to overcome white supremacy. It's like, well, how do you do that? You have to talk to people at work about their fucking, about their racism and their fucking lives, and, like, get them to, like, come, like, pass through a transformative moment with an organization. That is a union. There's nothing else to it. And once they form that, they fucking better pay dues, or else it's not worth anything. Like, if you don't want to pay, like, 1% of your wages to an organization that's going to help change the world, like, then you don't really want it, I guess, is my feeling. So I think that there are better and worse unions, and that's totally true. I mean, as a labor scholar, it's like, trust me, that's like half the scholarship out there. But I think in general, the concept of it, we have to have some fealty to that if we're serious about sort of a socialist direction.
Do you think that I'll say, our country, with the amount of cognitive dissonance and the amount of just vote blue no matter who, electoral politics is where it's at, do you think that our country has it in us to get out in the fucking streets and do a real general strike? Not just certain companies or what have you, but, like, literally millions of people, like other countries have done.
I mean, I'm like an intellectual. I sit at a desk a lot of times, and I try not to, like, say that the working class should be more militant. Like, this is not my job. It's like not my thing. Like, if you look historically at what the conditions are that have generated general strikes, like, there's not a pattern. Like, they don't come out of nowhere, but do they come out of, like, capitalist hellscapes? Yes. Do they come out of, like, proto-fascist places? Yes. And so it's like, is it likely to happen soon? No. So both things are true, I think. Like, there's no reason to discount crazy things happening, but also, like, I don't think that I don't think like a general strike or whatever is necessary for to create the kind of crisis that we were talking about. Like a crisis, a general strike in certain industries, in healthcare, education, logistics, and computing and technology. That's pretty good. Like your life can't function without those things. If you can shut down the railways and the phone lines and the food delivery systems, I mean, like I was on healthcare picket lines when a truck would come through with insulin, and the strikers would call the hospital, and they'd say, "All right, we have your insulin. Like, we would like a raise," and that stuff happens, and so like you have to think about extorting the capitalist class a little bit. And in order to do that, like you have to have some real leverage, and real leverage is not just numbers. It's like specific numbers in strategic places. If like the entire like hair care industry went on strike, like for that matter, if the entire book publishing world went on strike, like, no one's gonna, people's life would be completely uninterrupted. And but I think if you're talking about other places, that's a different story. And I think, as strategic people, we have to think about where those nodes and pivot points and pressure points are.
Yeah, absolutely. If there is one thing that you want our audience to take away from our conversation, what do you want to leave them with? I always stump people with this.
Yeah. I mean, so I wrote a book where all the evidence in the book as a scholar and as a whatever writer points toward like a working class movement as vital to our health and wealth and future as a society. And so there's no trick, there's no shortcut, it's like that's sort of what you get, and it starts at the bottom. And I think that sometimes we, grope around in the dark for like, oh, what should we do? Or how is this going to happen? And like the answer is to some extent really right in front of us. It's just very, very hard. We don't have the power to do it. Like we have to organize our workplaces, and we have to make sure that those organizations are strong and vibrant and vital. And they form the bedrock of any campaign for healthcare justice, education justice, racial justice, whatever. And so, that's sort of my thing. And I think that would be a takeaway I would hope people get from reading the book.
Awesome. Well, give us your websites and your all that fun stuff and your Twitter. Can everybody please follow Jamie on Twitter? Like, just please follow him. I was like looking for you, and I was like, this can't be him. Why
Really?
Does he have 900 followers?
Imposters out there. It's at Jamie K. McCallum on Twitter. My website is the same, jamiekmccallum.something.com or org or net. I can't even remember. I'm very easily findable through work. My last name at Middlebury. But if anyone, I don't know, how your show works exactly, but there's excerpts from the previous book, and I think this book on my website for free, and you can buy the book anywhere else you buy all books, buy any book, so just not Amazon. So awesome. Anywhere else besides that.
Well, thank you so much. And just as an aside to the viewers, so first I found out Jamie also has eyes who suck and has had eye surgeries. So we have that in common. And then I found out we actually grew up in the same city. So that's quite interesting. I feel like this was kismet. We had to do a show together.
That's right. We were probably at the same high school football games.
I didn't do that. I was like, fuck the jocks.
Oh, no.
No, I definitely didn't do that. But yes, I was supposed to hate your school. We were rivals.
Yeah, I hated yours too. If it makes you feel any better. So.
I did too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Jamie. I appreciate it. And I hope, I wish you the best with this book and everything else. You're welcome
Cool.
back anytime.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Take
Thank
care.
you. You guys, I have awesome news. One of my favoriteest people in the world, Stephen Donziger, is coming back. Yay! He's going to be telling us about what is up with his case currently. And then he's going to be joined by someone super special who I've had several times, but I'm not going to say who they are. But I wanted to have them both on together. It's someone I'm trying to get to run for president again. Let's just say that. So that probably gave it away. And no, it's not Bernie. But yes, more info on that next week. I'll be announcing. And Monday night, postmortem breakdown, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Thank you guys so much for watching. And again, thank you so much, Jamie. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks.